All right, I am Bill Stone, and I'm going to talk to you today about some experiments we have been conducting over the past 15 years in autonomous cave exploration, specifically the exploration of underwater caves. And this all goes back to a place in northern Florida called Peacock Springs. And for those of you who don't know it, it's a world-class site that reaches very great depths underwater, over 100 meters in places, with very large water-filled tunnels that up until 1987 had only been tentatively entered, where divers realized that they were at the limits of the scuba of that time. And in 1987, there was a 3-month project there, during which a lot of diving innovative concepts were attempted. It was the first use of long-range diver propulsion vehicles, carrying additional gas. This was all helium-oxygen in those days. It was all open circuit. We also had a variable depth decompression habitat that could be taken down to a depth of about 25 meters. Divers could get in there and then do their decompression in a warm, dry environment for the next roughly 8 hours or so. There were also experiments that were done at that time in closed cycle life support equipment, which today are known as rebreathers for underwater work. And that was the first microprocessor controlled rebreather there in the background, with Wes Skiles in the blue shirt directing Clark Pitcairn through some diving pre-setups. And so that was tested at Wokala. In fact, that was the rationale for going there in the first place. Exploration kind of came second. And a dozen years later, there was an opportunity to return with 12 years worth of technology development in between those two. And notably, we had switched from open circuit to closed circuit backpacks. By the end of the expedition, we were diving dual rebreathers with twin propulsion units for long-range missions, as much as 5 hours bottom time at 100 meters depth. We had changed out the decompression system so that divers could lock into a chamber at 30 meters depth and then be retrieved to the surface, where they did the next 12 hours to 14 hours of decompression in a chamber in fire retardant suits, while the people on the surface took care of the decompression for them. So that's kind of a preamble to what I'm going to start here with the main story. It was during that project that we began down the path of looking at how you could build three-dimensional models, maps of underwater caves. And so this had all started about 3 years earlier, when there was a meeting in northern Florida, and people from the Department of Natural Resources in Florida were asking whether it was possible to build 3D maps of underwater caves. And through some fortunate sponsorship, we were able to conduct an experiment along those lines. And so what you see over here are various components of a device that became known as the digital wall mapper, the barrel-shaped object. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. This barrel-shaped object was a 32-point array of pencil beam acoustic sonar systems, which were used to build a cross-section of the tunnel that we were flying through. There was a computer stack over on the left here that gathered all the data, and then back here in this big cylinder in the rear was a very high-grade inertial guidance unit with ring laser gyros for attitude measurement. And that all stacked up and fit on top of one of the big diver propulsion units that we had developed for the project as well. And so here we are. This was a kind of a archetypal mission in 1998, 1999. We were on site for 3 months again, and this is Jill Heinerth over on the right here, driving this big long cylinder that was creating cross sections of the tunnel as she drove that device through it. And inside, what it was doing was measuring the position of the vehicle and the orientation of the vehicle 20 times a second. And these sonar beams then were registered in geographical coordinates, UTM, XY, actually it was east, north, up, in meters of the points that were hitting the walls. And so if you gathered that all together, you could then build a 3D map. Here's kind of a close-up of it here. These ailerons that you see here in the front, the canard wings, were actually controlled by a little lever in the back here. And so you could do pitch and roll maneuvers with the vehicle. It actually flew quite well. Typical missions were on the order of 4 to 5 hours bottom time with this vehicle. They then come back to 5 hours of decompression in the water, and then another 12 to 14 in the chamber. And so this is kind of the result here that you would see from that. The multicolored nature is because we were in some parts of the cave remapping it, because we would always start from the entrance basin. And so each day that was a mapping mission, we would give that a different color. In here, there were 32 mapping missions. We mapped a little over 26 kilometers of cave. Some of that, as you can see here, was a duplicate of the same tunnels that we had gone down, because we had to go through that initial entrance section before we could split off into different side tunnels. And so this kind of gives you, even with a point cloud here, this is not meshed or anything, gives you an idea for what the cave looks like. Just rough scale here, the entrance basin is about 100 meters in diameter. There's a 60-meter dome down here called the Grand Canyon, not that far in. This is a little further, perhaps 2 kilometers from the entrance, and you can see that there are 2 tunnels branching off here. If you look at this in a section view, which is one of the nice things you can do with a 3D map, you can get geometry. And so if I was looking here at the cross section of this big tunnel here, this is a tunnel in Wakulla Springs, you can see this section view over here that lets you know that the cross section is about 45 meters wide and 22 meters tall. In most cases, the main tunnel was about 50 meters wide, and you'll notice here that you can see the presence of what at that time were completely new discoveries that are showing up on sonar. One of the benefits of using acoustic instruments underwater is that they're not affected by sediment. So we could see as far out as 200 meters with this vehicle and see things that no diver could ever notice, because they're focused on where their guideline is and moving on down. So that was kind of the story as of the spring of 1999. But there's a funny story that's worth telling that occurred right at the end of that project. And there was a review. As you might imagine, most of the people on the project were cave divers. Some of the best in the world were the ones who were doing the mapping missions. And but there was also about a 20% contingent that was the software and engineering side that had built all of the equipment, including the mapper. And there was a discussion at the end between the people who had driven the mapper and the people who had designed it. And after listening for about a half an hour of things that people thought could be improved upon, or where they were complaining about with the mapper, the fellow who had designed the electronic control system, Nigel Jones, stood up and said, "If we'd have had another year and another $1 million, we wouldn't have needed any of you bloody divers." And it was kind of an unexpected and astonishing outburst, and everybody kind of laughed at it. And but after a while, I started thinking, well, you know, he's really kind of on it, because when you look at the data that were acquired, we had a full 3-dimensional model of the cave. It would not be that much of a reach to put software routines in the vehicle to analyze where the vehicle was relative to the map that it had just created, and then put in exploration behaviors. Well, it's a simple thought, difficult in execution. But luckily, 3 years later, there was a call from NASA looking for ideas on how you would explore beneath the ice cap of some of these outer planet ocean worlds, where you have a layer of ice over the entire surface of the moon, and then underneath there's a global ocean of unknown depth. Speculations, for example, for Europa is that there's a 20-kilometer ice cap and a 60 to 80 kilometer deep ocean underneath that before you hit a silicate core. The motivation behind this is that there is a large speculation that extant life probably either monocellular or multicellular small life will be present in those oceans. And so there's an interest on the part of the national space programs to find whether that's true. And so we received in 2003 a $5.5 million federal grant to look into the ideas of how do you navigate below the ice cap. And so that was the basis for a project called DepthX, which stood for Deep Phreatic Thermal Explorer. And so after about 2 years of design and then a year of field testing, we took it for a final field shakeout mission where it was going to be doing exploration of unknown territory underwater. The place we took it was Cenotes, Zakatone, which I'll talk to about in just a second here. But to understand the vehicle, we took this concept of building a map and then figuring out where you are in that map to a new level, whereby we had information being acquired all around the vehicle. The term would be 4-pi steeradian scanning, so that as you drive this vehicle into unknown territory, half of the information, half of these beams, and in this case, the purple beams are 100-meter range sonars and the red beams are 200-meter range sonars. Half of those beams are pointed forward, half of them are pointed backward. The ones moving forward are creating the map and doing the explorations. The ones looking back are figuring out where the vehicle is relative to the map that had just been created. So it's a different way of navigation from the traditional ideas of dead reckoning, like what were used in aviation for a long time. And so here's a kind of a view of what that looks like with the vehicle within a 3D map as it is descending into an unknown territory. And in this particular case, the unknown territory was the Cenote Zakatone complex up in northern Mexico, just northwest of Tampico. And so here was the crew down there in May of 2007. And here's a little video that'll give you an idea of what this works. This has been around for a little while now, but it's still interesting to watch because what happens, I'll start the video here. We'll leave off the sound. The yellow cones that you see are validated sonar hits. In other words, it's real returns off a wall, not noise, not aliasing. And then the red points are the ones that are historically found to be true. So they are what is building the map. And then down the center, you'll notice there's a yellow line that is kind of zigzagging its way down. That is the trajectory of the vehicle as it's descending down. And this particular place is Cenote La Pilita. It's one of the smaller cenotes in the Zakatone complex. Nobody really knew what it looked like. As of 2007, divers had gone to the bottom on a shot line, but that's all. They didn't know how far it went, didn't know what it looked like. It's a classic hypogene karst chamber, as it turns out. All of the other ones are there as well. So this is the big one. This is Cenote Zakatone. The thing that is slightly different about this one is that it actually has flow. It's got acidic water coming up from volcanic intrusion. So there's a karst recharge zone about 20 kilometers west that's bringing water down through the limestone. It's speculated to be as much as 1,200 meters deep in the limestone. Somewhere down there, it's meeting the volcanic rocks, becoming acidic, and then carving out this cenote. It's about 140 meters in diameter. And so here you can get an idea. This is a cross-section to scale of the entire Azuferous Zakatone complex. And so the big one is Zakatone. Over here on the far right was La Pilita. That's the one you just saw in the video. The thing about Zakatone is that it's a vertical shaft. Goes down to 319 meters underwater. If you add the surface expression, there's an overhung entrance there, 16 more meters, so 335 meters. It's basically a big pit. It would be on scale with Golondrinas if it was air-filled as a deep pit. For those who are divers in the audience, this is a somewhat infamous site because it was the place where Sheck Exley and Jim Bowden attempted to set a world cave diving depth record back in April of 1994. Only Bowden returned. You can see from the map over here, they were within 30 meters of the hitting the breakdown floor at the bottom. But one of the things that came out of the May 2007 data was that if you look at the lower element here of the map, there's kind of a break in the density. And the reason for that is that there is a gap that's about 50 meters wide and 25 meters tall that apparently is a continuing tunnel. We were unable to continue work there at that time because our permits expired, but this remains an open lead, if you will. So whatever goes back there would have to go to 320 meters underwater and then begin doing autonomous exploration into this unknown tunnel at the bottom. When we were done with that project, NASA wanted to continue the development towards working under ice, and so the vehicle was reconfigured for building three-dimensional chemistry models under ice caps. This is West Lake Bonney in the dry valleys in Antarctica. Typically about -40 C in the daytime out there, so you have a habitat around the place where the vehicle is going to be lowered through the ice cap. You have to bore a 5-meter deep hole through the ice to reach the lake itself. It's highly stratified, and we had a large array of chemical sensors on this vehicle to build this three-dimensional model of the lake. And so here is a typical view of mission control over on the left over here. And the science team is watching projections of the map that's being built, as well as the chemistry sensors that are sending data back. So you might say, how are you getting that data back? I'll come to that in just a minute here. But here's a profile view, or I'm sorry, a plan view of West Lake Bonney, showing all of the traverses that we did with the vehicle. We mapped 76 kilometers over the course of 2 years in there, including going out into East Lake Bonney through this narrow section here. All the while transmitting data back to mission control and having the vehicle figure out how to find that hole from as much as 2¼ kilometers away. So here's a map of the lake with a little vertical exaggeration in the scale. These little blue pools on the bottom that you see here were places where the temperature got as low as -5 C, so that's about 23 Fahrenheit. And we knew that because we had to dive down there to recover some tools that were dropped. The NSF doesn't allow you to leave man-made elements in these environments. So here's a 3D model of what the vehicle is seeing under the ice cap. This happens to be the toe of the Taylor Glacier, which is coming in. There's cave-like features under here, and then comes up to the underside of the ice cap right above the vehicle there. And so finally, when you put all this together, you get this 2.5-dimensional map of the bottom of the lake, and then these white columns that you see here. If you click on those, you get the chemistry profiles for the entire water column. And you put all those together, and using Marching Cube's isosurface calculations, you can get 3-dimensional models of the chemistry in the lake. The thing about data is that underwater, radio frequency communications are rapidly attenuated. So this is not like talking to a spacecraft with an RF or a laser communication system, which is what is currently now done in space. Underwater, you got to come up with something else. And so what we did was to have a fiber optic link, kind of the same that you would have with a fiber running to your house for HTV. This particular one was about 2.3 millimeters in diameter. It was floating fiber so that the fiber could be fed from the surface base camp, and it would coast up along the underside of the ice cap, which fortunately in this case turned out to be very smooth. But we did want to test the ability of the vehicle to do things on its own. So periodically we would break that connection, and then the vehicle would go off and do its own thing. And so here's a video of the vehicle returning from a mission from about 2 kilometers out, and you'll see in the short section on the left here, there's a camera that looks up to the underside of the ice cap. Oops. Let's see if we can get it to go here. Whoa. And kill that audio there. So it's coming onto the ice cap looking for a collimated oscillating light source that's flashing at about 2 times a second. And when it sees that, it will lock onto that and ride straight up on that beam through the hole. And you can see there's no connection to the vehicle there. And I'll just run this one more time so now you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So here's the vehicle looking up. It sees this light, backs off, comes over, centers itself on that beam with the video using machine vision, and then it rises right up center through the hole. So this was the beginnings of what we would call autonomous rendezvous and docking, and you'll see that to a more interesting extent here shortly. When that was over with, there was a great interest at NASA to extend the range of these vehicles under the Ross Ice Shelf to do calibrations of the ice-penetrating radar for the Europa Clipper mission. And so we built this vehicle called Artemis. It was a 1.2 metric ton vehicle, had a range of about 25 kilometers. And the idea was to go under the Ross Ice Shelf, varying depth in that location of about 30 to 200 meters. We had to get through an 8-meter thick ice cap. It turns out there was another 12 meters of frazzle ice below that. So by the time we were done at about 15, 18 meters underwater before you broke out into the section under the Ross Ice Shelf. So here's a very brief video showing what this whole thing was all about. This is the construction of the vehicle. Back at our shop in Austin. Everything came together from scratch. All of the electronics over here on the right have to be put into pressure-proof canisters. All of those are then connected with a couple of hundred underwater cables. There are 8 thruster units on the vehicle so that it can not only maneuver X, Y, and Z, but it can also rotate about any of those axes. And so here it's finally put together, and then it gets shipped off to Antarctica. This is the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. That is Mount Erebus off in the background there. And then the first 12 meters we're able to dig through with an auger, and then after that you have to lower a tube to keep out the flowing frazzle ice. There you see some of it right there. And once you're down through that, you dig through the snow that has accumulated while the lab is being put up over, and there's the final tube going down to the water. Vehicle comes in on a sled, taken out, and you put that into the habitat. And it's because it's a 6 degree of freedom vehicle, we can actually pick it up by the nose and drop it down through the hole vertically, which you'll see here in just a second. We use divers initially to check out the vehicle once it reached the ocean below the Ross Ice Shelf, just to make sure that there was nothing wrapped around the propellers or anything. And then once that was clean, the vehicle would go off for about a 10-hour mission. So here we are down the hole. And then it goes through this burping maneuver where any trapped air is dumped by spinning and pitching the vehicles. That's what's happening here. You're seeing the thing getting rid of the trapped gas. But this frazzle ice was those crystals you just saw. It's packed to a depth of about 6 to 8 meters. And then here we are out under the Ross Ice Shelf building these maps that are going to be used for radar calibration. At the same time, scientific crew is getting feedback through that fiber optic. We used cave radio to track the vehicle to a depth of even 50 meters down into the sea, salt water. So that was a surprise. And then at the end, the vehicle would be coming back from as far as 5 or more kilometers away. It would use a 2-stage navigation system to get close, and then this optical docking system was the final stage. The vehicle would capture that, and then it would pitch up 90 degrees vertical and be pulled back up through the hole at the end of the mission. So there were 20 of these. Longest ones were just a little over 5 kilometers out, so 10 kilometers round trip. And we learned a lot about how to have a vehicle do things on its own. There were about 250,000 lines of code driving this. So again, we'll come back here to this idea that the data from the vehicle are something that everybody wants to have, because if the system doesn't come back to the single point access hole, so you can think of this like, you know, underwater caving. If you don't get back to the entrance, you don't get the data. So our hedge, if you will, our security to this whole thing was we got the data live, recorded that in mission control, and if the vehicle was lost, well, that's the way it was. So on Artemis, we had a 15-kilometer fiber tether here in the back. So you can see this is down to about 1.2 millimeter fiber. It's smaller so that we could get 15,000 meters on the vehicle. And then while it was going out, we were able to do something called supervised autonomy, where the vehicle was doing its own thing, but we could intervene if we didn't like what we saw. So here's the idea of how you find your way home. From far out, you've got this inertial guidance unit and velocity measurement systems that guess where you are. When you get about 3 kilometers back in, there's an acoustic pinger that we can detect, and that will vector us towards this rod. And then when you finally get about 300 meters away, this rod, which is flashing optical, big LEDs on it, you can see that with machine vision cameras, come in and then latch. The vehicle then goes vertical, and you're pulled back out of the hole. And so here's the optical docking rod that we used, and then the capture right when the vehicle comes back, and then up the hole you go, and the mission is complete. You get your data. So there was the crew. It was a fantastic vehicle, about $10 million you're looking at right there. So if we had lost that under the Ross Ice Shelf, it would have been a significant embarrassment, but we didn't, luckily. But the thing is, it was about 1.2 metric tons. So it takes a crane to lift it up. It takes a big crew to operate it. It's complex and all of that. And we were continuously being asked by scientific crews, would it be possible to take this and shrink it? And so on that same mission, we built a rescue vehicle called Sunfish that we were going to use. It had a little grabber on the front of it in case Artemis only got back to within a kilometer or so of the hole, and then for whatever reason died, electrical power, or just couldn't figure out what was going on. We would go out with this thing, locate it, grab it, and then tow it back to the melt hole, where probably a diver would go down and put a lifting cable on it and bring it back out. So this was the beginning. Actually, we had been developing this vehicle since 2010. And so here's a second generation version of it. It's small enough and lightweight enough that a single person can pick it up. Usually when we're running on a site, we have one person at the rear and one in the front. So you get an idea here. This is much smaller. However, capability-wise, with the exception of the chemistry sensor payload, it pretty much does everything that Artemis did. And so here you can get an idea with this video here that this is a very agile device, the kind of thing that you would want to be able to see if you were going to explore complicated places like caves. And so this was the beginnings of the idea of autonomous cave exploration, going beyond where we were able to go in 1999 in Wakulla Springs. And so back in 2016, we took this down to Peacock Springs in Florida. Most of the people who are cave divers have been to this place. It's a complicated labyrinth. We work particularly in the section between the main Peacock 1 entrance and the pothole entrance. It's about 120 meters worth of diving between the two. And so this was the beginning of how do you make a robot truly explore an unknown environment underwater in a cave. This is a leap beyond what we had done at Zakatone with DepthX, because that was mainly just a vertical silo. This is full 3D. And there are unknown branches and things like that, and the robot has to figure its way out within that. And so here's a good example right here. This is what a diver sees. You'll notice the vehicle is in here. There is no connection to the surface. We're testing full autonomy here. And then what the robot will see is this. So it starts off as a point cloud and a trajectory map that the vehicle has. And so the way this works, if I can show you here, is it builds a 3D model about the vehicle at a particular point. You'll notice these white rays that are coming off. Once it has built the 3D model, it projects where it can safely travel within that 3D model, and then the rays that reach the longest distance in the largest tunnels, it will attempt to go there to build the greatest amount of new information. Now on top of this, we give it global state goals, like try to go a kilometer to the north, don't get any closer than 3 meters or 5 meters to the nearest wall, don't go any deeper than 200 meters, things like that. These are very simplified goals. We're not talking about scripted missions here. So here's a vertical plan view of the same thing. So you can see it's sweeping 3D models, making a judgment about where it can move, and then going ahead and moving to that next position. And in some cases, for those who have been through that pothole tunnel, there are pendants that hang down from the ceiling within perhaps half of a meter of the floor, maybe a meter. So you got to, for a diver, you just kind of plane through that. But for an autonomous vehicle, it's got to think, all right, do I really want to go through that? and is that the way to go? So sometimes when it's slow, it's thinking about what the best way is to go. And so now we have reached pothole, and we're coming home. And the nice thing now is it's using its own 3D map. You'll notice it's moving much faster than when it first went through. This is the place where the pendants are right here. It's trying to figure back through that pendant stuff. As soon as it gets through that, it's going to hop right along here and then zip all the way back to the beginning at about 5 times the speed that it went on the inbound journey. So this is the basic principle that we're using for autonomous behavior-based exploration. And so here was the 3D map shown on top of the old pencil sketch that they had for Peacock. And this is a fly-through. So for those of you who have done the Peacock to Pothole Tunnel, watch this closely and you'll see some familiar terrain here. So now what we've done is taken the 3D point mesh and mapped that to build this polygonal map that's a fly-through. You'll see where there's branching tunnels here, taking the smooth floored silty tunnel here. It's coming up on the section where there are pendants hanging from the floor, or from the ceiling rather, and then finally we're down to pothole tunnel. So that's that was kind of the preamble. Now the real test, if you will, what we did at Peacock, we actually had safety divers around every corner, all the way from Peacock to pothole. There were probably half a dozen divers on every test run that we did. And so their idea was if something went wrong with the vehicle, they could go over, turn it off, and then bring it back and we could figure out what went wrong. Well, in August of 2019, after 2 years of organization by Vicki Siegel, who envisioned the project, got the funding for the project, and led the project, the idea was to go over and test the vehicle in a truly unknown environment. And this was over in Namibia, where there are a series of very deep cave diving sites, all of which have now been beyond the range of divers, even using rebreathers, propulsion vehicles, and helium oxygen. So the latest technology in diving has been used here, and the caves continued beyond that. And so the idea with Sunfish was to see if it could build these maps on its own and explore beyond where the divers had gone. So here we are in northern Namibia. This is perhaps 50 kilometers south of Angola. And the first place that we went was Lake Guinness, which when we had first heard about this, I had not seen it, but our lead team of Vicki Siegel and Josh Moore had gone over and done some recon. We had thought you'd just walk up to the edge of the lake and put the vehicle in for a test. But in fact, when we got there, we realized immediately that this was another hypogene cenote, not unlike the stuff that we had seen at the Zakatone complex. And the access to this place was by way of a farm that used the lake as a water source for farming. It's a very rare resource in northern Namibia. And so here's mission control. Again, the idea is we have a data link to the vehicle. But as you'll see here shortly, once you start doing serious exploration, it's not tenable to feed that fiber from the surface. And so you have to come up with another solution, which I'll show you in a bit. One of the problems that we had immediately at Lake Guinness was that the walls belled out from the sides, and the floor was well beyond the range of the sonar instruments that we had on the vehicle. So we had to come up with some way whereby it could have some kind of a reference plane to work with for navigation. And because the vehicle can operate in any attitude, we just simply pointed it down vertically, had it use the wall as a pretend floor for its navigation reference, and then it would just drive down the wall vertically until it got to the bottom, flip over horizontally, and then begin its normal exploration procedures. And so as it did that, it completely by itself built this 3D map of the cave. Before we had come here, there were beliefs that this connected to another cenote called Lake Ochikoto, about 20 kilometers away. And as you'll see here, there's a, so this is a bottom view. So it went from about 90 meters wide at the top, long rather, and 40 meters wide to almost 300 meters wide and 175 meters long. There's a central plateau in the middle, and here is a video that'll give you a little fly through of it. And so as you can see, the bottom is a kind of a breakdown pile in the center. There's a kind of a plateau there, and then there's this big plain of silt on the bottom down at a depth of about 132 meters. And so the vehicle, once it had its bearings, simply flew around this until it built the map at the resolution that we specified, and then it came back up to the surface by itself. So this was the beginnings of really increasing the risk levels, if you will. The next place was heresy shaft. It's a 112 meter freefall drop down to the water. It's on Heresy Branch, which is about 30 kilometers south of Sumeb. And so here we are using a sked litter to carry the vehicle up to the entrance. There's a haul line winch system dropping the vehicle down 112 meters. Here you can see a view through the somebody on rappel looking down. Here's the vehicle and a platform, and then a person out on a boat here. The people who owned the ranch put this pipeline down here in late 1890s. Everything else you see here are access ropes from our crew. So here's a cross section of it, 112 meters down to the water. And then as far as everybody knew, it went down at least 120 meters below that to where there was a ceiling and a breakdown chamber. It seemed to be extending off from there. So here's the main lake diving platform over here. The vehicle is getting ready to go. Now, one of the things that we had to do differently here was, rather than doing surface-fed data fiber, we equipped the vehicle with an onboard spooler, which I think we have a picture of here coming up. And we backed that up with TopoDroid digital models of the air-filled portion of the cave using Disto-X units. We shot about 10,000 points with that to fill in. We weren't even close to the density of the sonar, which you'll see here in a second. So the upper part here, this is the 112 meter shaft, and then you get to the really detailed material. Just to give you an idea, you can, with a Disto-X, you can shoot, maybe a point per second. The underwater mapping system was collecting 10,000 points a second in acoustic domain, and so you get this much more detailed map. The deepest divers had ever been here was 162 meters back as recent as 2016. And there was a ceiling noted here at 120 meters. And then at that point, everything else was unknown. So the vehicle then explored into this chamber that turned out to be over 80 meters wide and well over 100 meters tall, which continued for another 400 meters to where it terminated down here at the bottom. Here's a plan view of this chamber here. You can see it's just an enormous elongated thing. Unfortunately, it's also hypogene type karst. So when you get here to the end here, the ceiling just comes down and closes on the breakdown. There doesn't seem to be any way out of this. Now here's a fly through. This is coming down the air-filled shaft, and as soon as you see the change in mesh density, that's where the underwater portion begins. So here we are, we're coming down vertically, and right here is the water surface. Here we come down, you're at the 120 meter level underwater. It breaks out into this sloping breakdown pile, and then bang, you're into this big chamber. You're looking up. The black sections are where we lost sonar beams. So beyond 100 meters from the vehicle, big house size breakdown, and then finally it all peters out down here at the bottom at a depth of 265 meters. So not quite 1,000 feet deep. And so here we are at Dragon's Breath Cave, which was the main target for the expedition. The story behind this goes that Vicky Siegel had been over in Cueva Cheve in 2017 and had torn an ACL ligament down in the salmon ladders portion of the cave and had to go back and have surgery done. And while she was doing that, she saw this BBC documentary that had a short video clip on Dragon's Breath and became fascinated with it because it contains the world's largest known subterranean lake. It's not exactly what you call impressive getting into it. It's just through a karst field. It's fairly narrow caving there. This is Kasha Bernaka from Poland. So you're looking at about 0.5 to 0.8 meters wide here, rigging on down. And then finally, the fifth pitch drops you out into this enormous lake. Depth right below the rope is about 60 meters. So it's not something like where you can just get off rope and step away and get to where you want. So we had to have a floating platform to do our operations with. We had boats for transiting people back and forth. And here's a long view of the lake. It's about 240 meters long and 120 meters wide at that point. So you can kind of get an idea. This was a map that was produced by an Italian team back in 2011. They just used a wire to drop down to get depths at various locations, and they used laser rangers to survey the locations of those wire drops. So they didn't really go into the underwater tunnel. They just mapped the surface of the lake, but it was a good map. So initially we ran this surface to platform line down into the cave, but for the vehicle to go and then do the exploration, we had this 4-kilometer onboard spooler, and we're now looking at fiber that's on the order of 0.7 millimeters diameter, so quite thin. And then that resides in the vehicle, and as the vehicle moves onward, it pays this out. So we were able to maintain this supervised autonomy mode. The reason we did this was because we wanted to be sure that we didn't miss something. And the beauty of supervised autonomy is that we can set up some very simple parameters. In fact, the control code to run this vehicle for all of these missions was about 5 lines per mission. So there was a directive to attempt to go in a particular direction. In this particular case, it was north because we expected the cave to go that way. There was a depth limitation of 200 meters that we put on the vehicle. There was a 10-meter keep out zone. In other words, don't get any closer than 10 meters to a wall. And then from that point forward, it was, okay, build a 3D map and don't get any lower than 60% of your battery power. So we're kind of running cave diving rules here. But that was it. That was the extent of the commands that went into the vehicle. And then it would go and do this. Now, left to its own devices, if anything got a little closer than 5 meters, it would stop. It simply would not go down that tunnel. And of course, any caver would if the passage continued. And so as we began to map Dragon's Breath here, we actually had rebreather divers on the team, Don Shirley and Andre Shirley and Christine Camp from Namibia and South Africa, all of them world-class deep divers. But we never had to use them. There was never a glitch where a diver was needed to recover the vehicle. And so this was the beginning of the work in Dragon's Breath. Ultimately, we discovered, as with heresy, the end of the cave down here at a depth of 205 meters. Heresy had reached 265, but it's basically the same kind of thing where there's a gigantic breakdown pile coming down in the ceiling eventually. Comes down and meets the breakdown pile. So it's a classic hypogene type formation. There is no flow here. If there is, it's seeping through the bedrock, but otherwise the aquifer is contained. If you look at the plan view, however, you see something pretty interesting here. Here's the lake chamber. This is the same one that the Italians mapped back in 2011. And the deepest dive was about where my finger or my cursor is pointed right here. The width of the cave at that point, the tunnel width, is 175 meters, and the height is over 80 meters. So this is some of the larger cave passage I have ever seen personally. Of course, there are larger caves in China in terms of tunnel dimensions, but for an underwater cave, this is pretty darn big. And we would not have realized that had we not had the 200-meter range of the sonar to pick this all out as the vehicle flew through. And so here's kind of a spinning map in 3D to kind of give you an idea of the morphology. It's got a central spine going down a relatively triangular shaped passage cross section, and then finally it just subsides on the edges going down. So what I would mention is we would not have caught these side sections because the vehicle keep out zone was preventing it from going there. So typically what we would do is on a mission, we would get to that point and see that, okay, there's a data gap there. We would reduce the obstacle avoidance keep out zone and give the vehicle a new objective that would, in theory, build in the unknown parts of that map and limit. And then there was a retreat feature that then said, okay, you can go into that so far, and then we want you to just simply pull yourself back out to the original trajectory so you could find your way home. So we could give it very simple nudges to go and build a map in more complicated areas. There was a stopping point that you can see right down here where there's a little bit of a data gap between the wall and the floor here. That's because there's a big boulder where the gap to the ceiling was less than half a meter and we couldn't get the vehicle to go through there. So, you know, a diver could probably go down there and fill in that gap. We didn't see anything that suggested anything more than a subsidence collapse on the east side here. So there's still a small question at the bottom of Dragon's Breath, but my general feeling is that it's just simply a breakdown blockage at that point. And so here we are. This is now 2020. We have used this vehicle now to go out and map other underwater cave features, including Hudson Grotto down in North Florida and several offshore caves as part of a science-related project. And there are a lot of requests now appearing to use this to go and build maps beyond where divers are able to reach. My sense is that probably within 2 to 3 years, we will be able to have a vehicle that can do 10, perhaps 20 kilometers penetration on its own, building its own maps and come home, at least for underwater caves.